To celebrate the launch of Cash Injection, the exploitative course that I've been working on for the past few months, I thought I would bring you guys a survival guide for getting through the micro and low stakes. We all have to embark on this part of our journey, and for some of us it's the end of our journey. It's a real roadblock. I know that many of you watching this may be stuck in micro stakes or low stakes. You may be plodding along, finding that you're making some progress, but you just cannot break out of those stakes. Today's YouTube video is going to consist of me going through 10 general tips that are really going to help you guys just have a better approach to the game to get more out of your journey in this crucial micro stakes stage that basically dictates whether or not you're going to make it to being like a successful poker player or not. But these are more general notions. Before we do that, I want to talk about the more technical and exploitative course that's dropped on carrotcorner.com that you can get today. It is now live. I'm super happy about this. It's called Cash Injection. I've been working on it for a while now. I've had the idea actually for over a year now, but I've really put it together in the last few months with the help of my editor and a few other people. And the idea with Cash Injection is that we are going through 10 spots that are very common, very fruitful and juicy, that are absolutely butchered by the competition, by the pool, across all sorts of stakes. We actually use mass data that's taken from stakes everywhere between 10NL, 50NL, 100NL, 200NL, all of this. So we're not just talking about things that only work at really low stakes, but we are talking about things that work against regs that aren't absolute crushers and recreationals as well. So this is a very broad course. It's going to have application across loads of player types, and the recipe is that we're going to go into a spot. We're going to give you the sort of trade secret, the thing that's going to work beautifully, that's going to increase your win rate in said common spot and therefore in your game, because the common spots really matter for your overall win rate. And we're going to show you how to do that 10 times for 10 different things. And once you start using all of those, the idea is that you will get a real cheat code. You'll get this hack to your game where your win rate's going to receive a massive boost. And here's the good part, without you having to spend tons of time and effort like you would have to become a theoretical crusher. You do want to do that. Of course, you want to become a beast at theory one day, and we do have the Carrot Poker School course for that as well, which you can find on Carrot Corner. But Cash Injection is an add-on. It's kind of a little mod that will get you winning way more money faster without having to be that great. You don't have to be a really strong player to benefit immensely from Cash Injection. You can check it out at carrotcorner.com or click the link at the top of the description for this video to find out more. Now, without any further ado, let me get into this survival guide, my checklist of 10 things that are really going to accelerate your journey through 10NL to 50NL, and a bit below that and a bit above that as well. It's not totally restrictive, so don't worry if you play 100NL, 5NL, this video is still for you. Let's go. Tip number 1, let's do it. They never bluff. It's nonsense. You guys will hear this a lot. You will hear people say this to you. You will post a hand in some Discord server, or you will ask for help from a friend. Maybe even your coach will say this if they're a bad coach. They never bluff. Some people think that because you're playing a low stake or a micro stake like 10NL Zoom or something like that, that your opponents are just simply incapable of bluffing. There are no spots in which they will bluff too often. This is totally false. There are lots of spots where your opponents bluff far too often. Even at 5NL, there are many spots that are bluffed way too often. Mass data shows us this. I studied a lot of mass data last year when I was making the initial preparations for grade E of the Carrot Poker School. This year I actually fleshed it out a lot more when I was teaching that live course, and I've used a lot of it for Cash Injection, which I've just spoken about. But one of the things I want to assure you guys of in this free YouTube content is that there are spots your opponents really bluff way too much in. Okay, we have to take a step back here and say, well, what about that net? What about that player running a HUD of 11-4 over 5,000 hands? Well, yeah, okay, maybe that guy never bluffs. Maybe there are individual humans who never bluff, but most humans have the bluff button in their arsenal and they're willing to use it. And actually, by far, the biggest driver of how bluff the spot will be is, pause the video, have a think about it. What do you think that factor is? The single most important thing to determine whether your opponent's bluffing too much or too little in a spot. Okay, assuming you've unpaused, you've thought about it. Maybe you haven't, that's fine too. The answer is, it's all about the composition of the range that they got to that spot with. More about that in tip 3, but effectively the idea is that it's not so much about how wild they are, how aggressive they are, how crazy they are in some spot, how studied they are or versed they are in game theory. You don't need to know any of that to just be bluffing way too frequently in spots where their range is too wide and too weak. There are loads of spots like that. However, there are other spots where they never bluff is actually like closer to true. In fact, it's so close to true that it's not a bad simplification. And those are spots in which it's very unnatural to be bluffing. It's a lot harder to reach a spot with a bluff candidate hand. So we'll talk about this more in tip 3, but this comes down to the ease with which your opponent can reach a spot with a range that contains enough weak hands that can bluff. That's the idea. You have to ask yourself that key question. Never just look at your hand, look at your opponent and say, I'm playing 25NL, they never bluff fold. This is a really bad leak and it explains why so many struggling losing regs. If you watch my journey with Mark on losing to cruising, he is a player that's really struggled with this, the red line plummeting downwards, right? The fact that people say things like they never bluff and have that ethos is a hugely impactful thing that's responsible for that awful red line that you see, this plague, this epidemic of a red line that you see across players that play these stakes. Okay, let's move on to tip number 2 in the survival guide. Tip number 2 is that they never fold is also total nonsense. You hear this all the time as well. You don't need to bluff at 10NL because your opponents are all stationary and they don't fold. Just value bet your good hands and you'll be fine. This logic is from like 1874. I would say it's from like 2005, but that would be flattering because even in 2005, where that logic was even more commonplace than it is today, it was still bullshit. It was terrible. And the reason for that is just like the whole they never bluff thing, they never fold is incredibly spot dependent. There are so many spots that fish weaker players, recreationals, businessmen, entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call them, fun players, people having a night out, whatever you want to call them, degenerate gamblers, fold too much in. There are spots that weaker players fold way too much in. There are spots that regulars fold way too much in, and usually, here's the thing, mass data shows us this, they're the same spots. For example, in Cash Injection, episode number 2, I believe it's number 2, it'd be embarrassing if it isn't, we talk a lot about this one situation that people fold all the time in, that it's just so ridiculously lucrative that you can almost just blindly apply aggression in that spot. There are loads of other spots like this too. A really good example would just be a situation where your opponent has to make calls with hands that look quite weak in terms of absolute hand strength. When your opponent has to call a lot of one pair, second pair, under pair, pocket pair when there's an overcard on the board to multiple barrels of aggression, that's likely a spot that's very overfolded. Similarly, if your opponent has taken an action with too many weak hands and not enough strong ones in the first place, that's another example of a spot that's very likely to be overfolded. So there are so many opportunities where like a pure aggressive red line fold equity harvesting strategy can be so lucrative and it can be the best strategy. I used to work with this guy who helped me make some of the grade E content. Again, that's the old live format exploitative course that we used to run. I took a lot of those ideas and put them into Cash Injection too. But this guy absolutely annihilated the low and micro stakes. Like his journey from like 5NL through to 100NL was just like, the red line was literally just this like rocket tearing through the sky. And then when he got up to higher stakes and started battling really competent, fierce opponents, it dropped off a bit. You know, the strategy sort of has its limitations, but when you're playing against weaker players, before you reach the sort of places where you're playing against strong professionals all the time, you can really run over games by knowing which spots to apply aggression in. So before you decline a bluffing opportunity and fall back on some, when I have it, I value bet, this is how you beat fish, I'm going to just like take candy from a baby and value bet my way through to 200 zoom. That's not going to happen. Just remember, they never fold is nonsense. There are spots, some of which we show you in Cash Injection, that actually are absurdly overfolded to the point where you could almost close your eyes and just press the aggression buttons and prosper. Alright, let's move on to tip number 3. Remember your opponent's landing range. Landing range is the range your opponent reaches a certain spot. In Cash Injection, we call this a node. A lot of people call it a node. It's not just for that course. But a node is a point in the game tree where you have the chance to act, right? Where your opponent has just acted, usually. So if you're on the river and you are facing a river bet, that node is a function of all of the action and ranges that preceded that action sequence, that preceded that point in the game tree. So for example, if villain opens on the button and you defended the big blind, we have a node that has a very wide range composition for both players. The big blind has many, many combos, and moreover, that range is actually quite capped because remember, they're going to 3-bet the really good hands in their range, like ace queen suited, jacks, nines, etc. pure. And they're going to 3-bet a lot of their other like suited broadways at quite a high frequency as well in some of their medium pairs. So big blind has this capped range that spans hundreds and hundreds of combos, something like 450 combos if I'm not mistaken, something around that. Remember, there's 1,326 combos in the whole game. So that's quite a lot of combos to be taking to the flop, right? If you think of all those trashy, terrible starting hands, you know, taking 400 of them, that's a lot of lousy hands you're seeing the flop with. Say it goes check, check, and then you reach the turn. And it goes check, check again, and you reach the river, and your opponent leads the river, let's say. Just bets half pot. He's a recreational player, fish, whatever you want to call him. So the entrepreneur bets the river for half pot with a range that you happen to know started with bazillions of combos. We can say here that their landing range was very weak. We also have a read of these types of recreational players in general that they're going to just bet their good hands earlier. What that means is that they don't have enough traps in their turn checking range waiting to spring aggression as a check raise or as a river bet or as a river check raise in some future line. What this entails is the idea that villain's range is now very, very weak. Villain is over bluffing. If villain bets half pot, pot odds wise, you only need 25% equity to call. That means that in order to make you indifferent, villain should only be bluffing 25% of the time that they're betting. In other words, they should have a 3-to-1 value to bluff ratio. That's incredibly hard to pull off when you've landed, remember landing range, tip 3, landing range, think about it, on that spot with way too many air hands and not enough good hands that you've delayed your aggression with. That is one example of a spot that is absolutely hugely, hugely overbluffed. There are other examples of spots that are very, very underbluffed. There are examples of spots that are overfolded, underfolded. You can use this in any part of the game tree, not just bluff catching. I'm just using this as a really crude example. We talk about more of this in Cash Injection, but once you get really good at understanding how a landing range works, and there's an episode of Cash Injection that's actually one of my favorites that's all about positional exploits, how to use positional exploits as a title, and that's really just concerning the origin. Where did the range start? Was it the button that opened? Was it under the gun? Was it a 4-bet pot, hijack versus cutoff? All of these spots have totally different origin ranges, and that leads to totally different range compositions later that land on flops, turns, and rivers and imbalance themselves hugely because of that. So that's tip 3. Remember your opponent's landing range. It's often much more important to consider what did villain get to this spot with, roughly, than to try and play psychic mind-reading guessing games about whether they're going to feel like bluffing on this occasion or not based on some really specific factor. You know, I often hear students go wrong by saying something like, well, he should know that that card is good for my range, therefore he's not going to bluff there. Or this looks like he just has a thin value hand because, you know, it's 25NL and people never bluff. So before you make up some nonsense like this or get way too specific or way too assumptive or too vague by just tarring every player with the same brush, you want to really be honest with yourself and say, what's the landing range that got here? Because if I can understand that, then I'm sort of 3/4 of the way to figuring out whether this spot is bluffed too much, folded too much, called too much, whatever it may be that you're trying to figure out. Hopefully that's useful. That may be the most important tip you're getting today in this video. Let's move on to tip number 4. Playing GTO means very often choosing an inferior line. That's right. When you study solvers and you look at GTO Wizard or PileSolver or any other program, lots of them are available. I'm not sort of advocating one over the other. I'm not affiliated with any of them. There's lots of solvers out there that people like to use. And when they use a solver, they very often like to go on your video and post a comment that says, look, the solver does X here. Look, it's doing this 90% of the time. You can't bluff here. You can't call with this combo. You have to check this 20% of the time. And none of this actually matters in the real world in terms of direct application. What matters is the theory, the nuts and bolts, the physics, the poker physics, metaphorically, I use this term loosely, behind that output. Why is that output existing? What has caused it to come about? And how do we understand those nuts and bolts that tie together the game? If you imagine understanding poker as this web of cohesive ideas that sort of interlace and link all over the place and sort of match up with one another in a cohesive way, GTO is basically the objective form of that when neither player has an exploitative edge, but it's all about the why. Understanding GTO is about understanding why things are what they are in game theory. That's what we do in the Carrot Poker School. We get you to see how the game actually functions objectively. But when you just take a single output, or something you've seen or remembered or heard or been told or taught, and you put it onto your game literally and just start pressing that button at the table by going, oh, I remember this spot in the solver, I meant to call this combo because it has X blocker. Well, firstly, having X blocker instead of Y blocker is probably like a 2% equity swing. We talk about this a bit in Cash Injection. We actually node lock the solver at points in Cash Injection, say, look how much EV swings when I change something exploitatively. Now let's look at how much the EV swings from blocker to blocker. From blocker to blocker, you're talking about 1-2% swings, sometimes 3, maybe 4, in like the most extreme case, 4% equity swing, 4% equity swings, or 4% fold equity swings, basically nothing. When you start actually looking at what happens when you just move someone's strategy a little bit and say, okay, they're folding a bit too much here, they didn't land, remember landing range, they didn't land on this node with enough of these types of combos, or they're 2-bet happy in this spot when flop goes check check, for example. Now you're making real progress. Now you're gaining 15% pot share EV. You're gaining like 5 big blinds by bluffing the river. In GTO, you gain like half a big blind. 1 big blind by getting the blockers exactly right in a spot where blockers are really impactful. Sometimes they're not at all. So before you just say, if I play GTO, I'm going to do fine, before you fall into the trap of being that reg that goes really wrong, in my opinion, and I hear people say this a lot, they say something like, it doesn't matter if I play exploitatively or not, because a GTO game is enough to destroy the regs and recreationals in my game. They're actually wrong for 2 reasons. 1, rake is massive, and trying to overcome a rake of 7 or 8 BB per 100 or whatever you pay at microstakes is really difficult. 2, you won't apply GTO properly. You will make errors, blunders, mistakes, unless you're cheating with real-time assistance or something. Not recommended, unethical, bad. So not only is a game theory optimal strategy when it's applied literally not that great, not going to yield you a big enough pre-rake win rate to really beat the game that hard, but it's also going to toss away tons of EV in many, many spots. Let's say that you face a river raise in a situation that is basically unbluffed. Unbluffed is like my sort of the thing I round it down to when it's so underbluffed that you basically almost never see bluffs. Maybe you see bluffs like 5% of the time when you're meant to see them 30% of the time, or something like that. So let's say you overbet the river and get jammed on. And GTO's like, oh, look at this one combo that has this particular blocker that wins 2 big blinds. There's a call here, you need to call that. And you go away into the lab with your combo and you're like, God damn it, I folded there. Next time I'll remember that and I'll call this combo. I'm going to call this combo next time. Look at that blocker effect. That's what I need to remember. You go into the heat of battle next time, you make that call, and you're right in GTO, you remember the concept beautifully, and you gain 2 theoretical big blinds, but you lose 36 real life, real world, monetary big blinds. What matters in poker is not EV, in theory. Someone asked me an interesting question on a video that I put out earlier in the week. They said, Pete, isn't your new concept of true EV just EV? He was like, sorry to be a hater, but isn't true EV just EV? And the answer is no, because EV is a general term that refers to theoretical EV, maybe, could be exploitative EV actually in reality. But the thing is that when you look at a solver, it'll tell you the EV of a play. But that's not true EV, that's theoretical EV. And this 0.4, playing GTO means very often choosing an inferior play, is all about choosing the maximal theoretical EV play, but actually the worst true EV play. What's really going on? I was talking to my student the other day, and she was saying, do you know, Pete, I got so much better at this game when I started just stopping myself and asking, what is actually going on here? And I said, you know what, that's such a key question. What is actually happening? What's the true range I'm up against? Because that is the EV. We can't see it. It's not measured for us on our screen. We can't calculate it. Understanding roughly what that EV is, that's true EV, and that's what we care about. So before you take a GTO line or strategy or try to play like a robot or say, I don't need to exploit because GTO is good enough, you're missing the point. Your goal is to maximize your EV in each and every single spot you get into, and the best way to do that is to think what's there in the real world in front of you, and how do you take advantage of it. Okay, let's move on to point number 5. Point number 5 for today, balance is an empty concept. Balance is all about repercussions. Being unbalanced isn't the same thing as saying you're losing EV, you're playing badly, you're making blunders or mistakes. Actually, balance is about your opponent knowing that there's something lopsided about your strategy, like you're not bluffing enough in some spot or bluffing too much in another, or maybe something really specific, like you're not using enough non-backdoor flush draws to float the flop in a certain situation, like calling a c-bet in position. I mean, like this is all stuff that in the theoretical realm has to be the case, because when you run a solver, what you're looking at is the sort of endless result of the solver battling itself ad infinitum to reach an equilibrium, to reach a conclusion where it's no longer exploitable, where neither side can deviate for any extra profit. And in the real world, you don't have the same perfect information that the solver had against itself that made it important for it to build its sort of absolute tank of a strategy, this fortress of a strategy that's so unexploitable, but that was necessary based on the harsh requirements of its opponent, seeing every little dial that it moves, every little knob that it tweaks. In the real world, we live under this beautiful shroud of non-information. We don't know anything about the way our opponent specifically is playing. We certainly don't know that they're using a certain blocker too often or not often enough. We may not even know that they're c-betting too often or too infrequently, like that player specifically. So sure, like you can get exploited if you're playing in ways that are unbalanced against a good opponent, and either of the following three things are true. Either that opponent knows how pool plays and your imbalance mirrors pools, like you're basically an antelope in a herd of antelope behaving like an antelope, yeah, you're going to get eaten by a tiger. Second way you can be exploited is if the opponent knows that you specifically play in a certain way. This would be something that happens in what we'd call a higher visibility game, like playing a home game or playing a heads-up match for 50k hands, or playing in a really small 200 zoom pool on PokerStars every single morning for 9, 10, 11 months against the same reg, something like that. Unlikely that you get that kind of read made against you, at least accurately. And then the third thing that could actually affect counter exploitability could be the transparency of the spot, like how often it repeats itself. So if you play a really common node, like you open the button and you open 100% on the button, you do get exploited for that relatively quickly in the grand scheme of things because people figure it out. But when it comes to something like, oh, I'm going to raise this turn a bit lighter here because I think my opponent's barreling too wide, but then this voice in your head goes, don't do that, that's unbalanced. You've got to play a balanced GTO sensible strategy. There's no EV loss from unbalancing your strategy. When you have a play that is the same as another play in theory, you don't lose EV in a vacuum in that iteration by taking one play over another. You don't. There is no magical beanstalk that falls from the sky that showers you with gold when you get a frequency right or balance your range. It doesn't give you anything. Yet there are some very misguided souls out there that are clinging to this raft of balance and this choppy sea where really true EV is the only thing that matters. And they're like, I've got to balance my range. I can't bet this hand because like maybe I should just use ace-x with the club. Or maybe like this is the wrong combo and if I had ace-queen I would bet, but with ace-jack I should check. Another thing people do all the time is they just make these random arbitrary comparisons of one hand in their own range to another hand in their own range. The hands in your range that you're not currently holding have either a completely empty, meaningless effect, or they have like a minuscule, tiny, indirect effect on your opponent's strategy. It doesn't really matter that you could have king-queen with the queen of hearts instead of the queen of diamonds. That has nothing to do with how good it is for you to bet king-jack of clubs in some spot. But you still see people try to like put their own range construction and their own range balance before what's actually the best play against their opponent's range, and that is madness. It's like actual insanity. It's like caring about something that really doesn't matter at all. It's like being in some other kind of contest. Let's say you were in like a cooking contest and you spent all your time arranging the onions in like the perfect formation before you put them in the pot. That has nothing to do with how good the food is when it comes out. So in poker, when you try and make your own range really harmonious with itself and you try and make your frequencies perfect and you worry about like the imbalances that your opponent won't know about and won't have time to really punish you for, even if they did know about, you're kind of doing that thing with the onions. You're like caring about something really silly and arbitrary. So yeah, balance is an empty concept. Don't really question whether it's right to step away from the fortress of balance and do something that's free. If you have a reason to do that thing, if you think that thing is better because you've compared it logically to the alternative, you should do it. And you shouldn't care about what it does to your strategy. Unless you're in some extremely repeatable spot or you're against somebody that knows what you're doing and has figured you out because they just know you personally. Or thirdly, you're behaving in a way that the pool behaves in the same way and there's a reg that's exploiting it. For example, people are very bad at checking behind on the flop with good top pair, even though in Equilibrium and GTO there's like a bunch of that goes on certain textures. People are bad at it, right, at 10NL. If you're also bad at that, there may be some top regs out there looking to exploit you and overpaying the turn a lot and overbluffing that node and punishing you. But they're going to be a minority. And for most spots, there's not that same level of repercussion. Balance is about repercussions. If there are no repercussions, it's not important. Alright, let's move on. Tip 6. A general one, more of a mindset one, stay curious, stay humble. I don't want to spend too much time on this because also I want to get through this video. But stay curious basically means If you are fascinated and enthralled about the game, if you're really keen to make your play better and to be the best version of your poker self, you're going to work so much harder and you're going to get such better results. That's it. Opposite of curiosity is jadedness, being fed up, slogging your way through. Basically, I was going to call this tip, don't become the grind. Be on the grind, but be curious and humble on the grind. Don't become the grind. Don't have the grind infiltrate your mindset to the point where you're just like, got to get through millions of hands, got to have a positive win rate, so bored of this fucking state, got to do this, oh, I got check raised again, and bullshit. Like, don't become that. If you're that player, just ask yourself, what are you doing? If you're just like autopiloting, not thinking about anything, all you're really doing is digging bad neural pathways deeper into your brain. You're entrenching these bad habitual lines of thought that are going to really come back to bite you. Stay curious. That allows you to undo bad habits as you're forming them. You can be fluid enough to stop your brain forming bad connections too solidly and too rigidly. And stay humble. Never think I deserve to win because I studied GTO for 5 hours and this guy didn't. If you're not looking at what they're doing wrong and exploiting them, you don't deserve a big win rate. If you're not capable of understanding how your opponents are making mistakes and doing something about it, you don't deserve to beat the game that you're currently in. And that's what cash injection is going to help you do. That's what a lot of our content tries to help you do, is see how to gain that extra EV. But yeah, you have to be curious, you have to be hungry in order to find it and to want to do the work that helps you find it. Tip number 7, pull the trigger, fight fear. I love this one. This is so key. If you get stuck in a mode of thinking where you no longer want to bluff, you don't want to call, you just want to sort of net it up, go inside your little cocoon, fold, value bet your way to glory. That's not going to work anymore. It used to work at like 10NL, 25NL, 7-8 years ago. It doesn't anymore. People are too solid. Okay, they're still bad, but they're nowhere near as bad, and you have to pay a ton of rake. So you have to be willing to bluff in really overfolded spots where no one else bluffs. You have to be willing to call when people are over bluffing. You have to be willing to use bet sizes that are obnoxiously large sometimes that maximize your EV. It could be the case that in a solver there's a 2 big blind difference between bluffing for 300% pot and bluffing for pot. But in reality, people are folding 98% to 300% pot and only 54% to pot. So they're grossly overfolding way more to the giant bet than they are to the pot size bet. It's your prerogative to identify what are the spots where I can make a big investment that other people wouldn't make a big investment in, that will petrify my opponents, that will exploit them, that will put them out of their comfort zone. We saw in the last video, this Wednesday actually, if you're watching this on Friday the 16th, our video on Wednesday the 14th, someone bet 2x pot against me on the turn as a c-bet, and I don't face that very often. It threw me out of my comfort zone, and it actually made me over-defend the turn, because I didn't know how to construct the range, right? So it made me imbalance myself, maybe in a way that my opponent was predicting. So this is very key. If you're not willing to take lines that are a little bit off the beaten track sometimes, where the sizing is a bit out of your comfort zone, where you're bluffing in a spot you wouldn't normally bluff, if you can't train yourself to start pulling the trigger and say, fuck it, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this play, man. I'm just going to do it. If you can't train yourself to do that, you're going to be this rigid, caged poker player, this like caged animal all your life. You need to be free range. You need to be like roaming around, marauding, preying on the competition. Pull the trigger. Fight the fear. If you feel the fear rising up inside yourself, if you feel a resistance to making these aggressive plays that you know you should probably make, identify it, fight through it, and reward yourself. Lavish yourself with praise for fighting through that barrier, for jumping in that ice bath. Even if it doesn't work, lavish yourself with praise. Free yourself. Don't be shackled. Tip number 8. Checking is wildly underprotected. I didn't want to get too technical in this list because, of course, cash injection is very technical. It's about the exploits that are going to work in the technical domain and why, and there's lots of proof in the course. There's like a few solver studies, there's loads of hand histories, stuff like that. So in this video, I didn't want to get too technical, but I do want to stress this one. People are so bad at understanding that check has the same EV as bet does in certain common spots. They're very bad at saying, hold on a minute, if I check here, yeah, I don't get protection, and maybe I don't get enough value against like a slightly worse made hand, but I get villain to bet at the bottom of their range, or I get to check raise and win a huge pot when I'm coolering them sort of top tier hand against slightly worse hand. So people neglect the check option with their good hands, and what that means is that they end up checking with a range that is just like really weak. We talk about this at a few different stages in cash injection, but once you realize that in most spots where people had a free bet option, not like procedurally checking to the razor right instead of donk betting, but in most spots where people legitimately had the option to bet and they chose not to, they don't have enough good hands in their range. Once you see that, it opens the door to a myriad of different aggressive options that didn't exist to you before. Don't leave your opponents unpunished for this awful range construction, because if you don't do anything about it, here's the thing, it doesn't actually hurt them. For them to check a really weak range doesn't cause them any harm if you don't actually exploit it. Okay, it might if they're like missing clear value bets or missing mandatory bluffs, but if they're just checking optional hands all the time, or like putting all the good hands in the bet range and then like not bluffing enough, that doesn't actually cost them anything in theory. So you have to go out of your own theory fortress and you have to punish it. You have to take the exploitative play that maximizes your EV against that leak. It's a very common leak. Okay, let's move on to tip number 9. This is more of a mental game one again, but tilted volume delays progress. It's okay to get tilted. We all get tilted from time to time. Poker's going to throw at you some sessions that are just completely bitter, horrible, huge pills to swallow. And in those cases, it's okay to tantrum a little bit, maybe, to feel a bit victimized in the moment. But it's all about how you bounce back, and it's all about what you actually put back into the game on the tables. Do you take that pain and that anguish, that sort of hard to swallow pill, and just spew it back at the poker table and say, fuck you, poker, I'm going to go all in here even though I shouldn't. I'm going to call even though I know they're under bluffing here, and I'm going to like lose another 5 buy-ins to desperately chase my losses. Doesn't even have to be that extreme a version of it, but if you drop down from A game to B- game or C+ game, or God forbid C, D, E, F game and beyond because you're tilted, you are literally removing bricks from the wall that you've been building. It's like getting a Lego set, trying to put together some like fighter plane and then like pulling the wings off and eating them and spitting them out into the bin. That's what you're doing when you play tilted sessions. You're smashing up the thing you just built. Don't do that. It really reminds me of me trying to do DIY when I watch a student with tilt problems, because I'll get like close to building something and then I'll like fail miserably because I'm a massive fish at DIY. I'll just like thrash around and like smash the thing, and I'll have to get my girlfriend to fix it for me inevitably. So don't be me at DIY at poker. Try to understand that when you're tilted, that's okay, and maybe you need to take a step back, decompress, get back into a good frame of mind, stay curious, stay humble, remember, that'll help, and try and enjoy your next session and be thirsty for actually learning and the technical aspects of the game. It's harder to tilt when you're really geeking out and being really curious. It's very easy to tilt when you're obsessed with results and when you just want things to go your way. But the bottom line here is, take out your tilt somewhere, but not on your stack, not on your chips, not on your EV. Tilted sessions rack up fast, they undo your progress. You're not just stopping on the treadmill, you're not just stopping the treadmill when you go on tilt and play, you're actually rewinding it, you're moving it in the opposite direction, you're putting the calories back on, in this weird metaphor. Don't do that. Tilted volume ruins careers, delays progress. Find a way to get your tilt under control, and don't play unless you feel like you're in the right frame of mind. You can do warm-ups as well. That really helps, just asking yourself, how well do I feel like I'm playing right now? And if it's not well, what can I do to make sure I'm playing better? Tip number 10, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a comment, let me know what you think about these formats, because there is every chance that I'll repeat this format in the future. If you did like it, smash the like button. It lets me see which videos are going down well and which ones aren't, and it really helps me bring the right type of content to you guys in future. Before I sign off, I also want to say, do check out Cash Injection. It's the top link in the description. It's very easy to see, and you can look at our example video and our full syllabus over at the Cash Injection page of Carrot Corner. Alright, all of that said, tip 10, don't stop having fun. So many people stop having fun with poker, or at least they decrease the amount of fun that they are having over time. This happens for a few reasons. It happens first off because people get jaded and they play too much volume, they're playing badly, they stop studying, or at least they stop studying in a productive way, and that actually means that they stop learning and growing. And when you stop learning and growing and thriving and doing all of those good things and forming new neural connections, when your neuroplasticity sort of seizes up and you go into this like seizure mode of just like doing the same things over and over again, you stop enjoying the game. And you have to really make sure that you stay curious, because that's going to help your enjoyment. You have to remember why you got into poker in the first place. I have this thing in my book, Poker Therapy, called the grit engine. And it's basically this idea that in order to be a successful poker player that keeps coming back, you have this circular engine that you have to keep fueled with 4 constituent parts. And the constituent parts you need to keep fueled are inspiration, motivation, discipline, and goals. So to do those in reverse order, your goals are things that you're trying to obtain. They could be short-term, long-term stretch goals, mid-term goals. You need all of those typically. Like, I'm going to move up stakes. That's my stretch goal for the year, or for 6 months. It could be something like, I'm going to get better at 3-bet pots this week. That's more of a mid-term goal. Short-term goal could be something like, I'm going to try and play at least my B+ game today. That's an example of goals. Goals are very important in both the short-term, long-term, and mid-term. Then we have motivation, which is actually the getting up and going, the getting out of bed, the sitting at the table, feeling the urge to play or to study. And to get that, you need to basically make a habit out of it, right? It has to become almost ritualized. We are creatures of habit. So motivation is very important to make a ritual, to do something at the same time each day, to get into a good rhythm that really motivates you to keep doing it. It's like going to the gym or eating healthy or something like that. It's the same with your healthy poker habits. Then we have discipline. Isn't quite the same order I introduced them. That's fine. Discipline is the ability to make yourself come back. So when you don't feel like it, poker is important enough to you that you're still going to do it. Like if you want to send someone you love a birthday card, let's say, although birthday cards are kind of shit, just get them a present. And you can't really be bothered going and sending the card or going on the website and typing in the thing because you're a bit tired. But you know that you love this person enough that it's worth doing and that you'll want to do it and you'll feel bad if you don't. And so that part of you disciplines the lazy you and says, no, you don't get to be lazy here. You're going to do this whether you really feel like it or not, because it's the best thing to do and it's the right thing to do. You need that to some extent in poker too, but you don't want it to be all discipline because that's where you stop having fun. Going back to point 10, don't stop having fun. When poker becomes a big slog and a big grind and a discipline is like running the whole engine here, that's an issue, because the fourth thing in the grit engine is inspiration. And this goes back to the question of, how did I get into poker? What inspired me originally? Was it because I wanted to become Helmuth? Or was it because I just wanted to like go on an extra vacation every year? Whatever that thing is that lit that spark, probably it's neither of those things, but you know, it could be. Whatever it is that lit that spark, hang on to that. You know, for me, it's just like being really good at something. It's like having a skill and being like an artisan of that thing, and that thing being a geeky strategy game that I love, and like reminding myself of that is hugely inspiring. Sometimes reminding yourself of how far you've already come can be inspiring because it shows you that it's worth continuing given that you've already grown so much. But inspiration is so key to having fun. If you don't have inspiration, you tend to lack the motivation to do something, and then it takes more discipline to do it. The more discipline it takes, the more you're sort of doing something out of having to do it, feeling like it's sort of a compulsory activity, the less fun that's going to become, the worse that activity is going to be for you, and the more jaded and deflated you're going to get at the poker table, the less curious, the less you're going to grow. So to not stop having fun, you need to make sure you keep your grit engine healthy. You need inspiration, motivation, discipline, and goals, and all of those should work together. And if any of those are ever lacking, it's a sign that you need to spend a bit more time on your approach to the game in general and make sure it's always fun. If poker feels really unfun, take a break, reset, come back. Don't play poker if it's not fun. It's not worth it. If poker's not fun for you, it will be hell. Honestly, the only way to survive a game with this much variance, a game that's this grueling and punishing, is for it to be really fun and to be geeky and obsessed and curious. I know that's a lot of points sort of amalgamated together, but yeah, the premise is have fun. It really helps. Not only does it make your life better, but it helps you achieve your poker goals as well by keeping you more engaged and making poker seem more alive to you, keeping you more inspired. Okay guys, don't forget to check out the top link in the description. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you back here for another video in a few days. I may take a little bit of time off over Christmas. There may be a bit of a lag in videos then. We'll see how we go, but I'll try and keep them coming mostly regularly. I'll see you guys soon. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Bye for now.